it struck me as walking around that here we've got this fantastic ruin which just looks plain and is not really talked about, it's not really explained, and that's a pity because it's one of the most magnificent buildings, or would have been one of the most magnificent buildings of its time in the 1280s, and I wanted to bring some idea of what it was like, bring it to life, and so I started to research what the interior would have been like and why it was used, and why such a place, which was the third largest hall at the time, was built here in a small town, insignificant town almost, and you know, it was a building to rival ones in Canterbury and ones in Westminster, so it's so important, but little is known or talked about. The Great Hall was built alongside the chapel at the same time to impress, right? No one really needed something so large, but the person that built it, Bishop Burnell, was a very wealthy and impressive man connected to the king, and he wanted to show how important he was and how important Wells could be, and so he built something which no one else really could have built, and the idea was to impress the king as much as anything. It would have been used for banquets, celebrations, meetings of courts, different courts, and it offered lavish entertainment and lavish accommodation fit for a king. It's hard to get an impression when you see just two walls and no roof. The building was built in the latest architectural style of the time, and the idea was to bring in as much light as possible, so that's why the windows are so tall. And the ground would have been lower, but as the walls were demolished, now they had 4 walls, of course, now it's got 2, they raised the ground, partly in the design and partly to help with the drainage in this area. When you look at the walls, what you see is just bare stone, red sandstone and limestone, and fantastically dressed window stones. But if you were here when you came, you would never have experienced such a building. It would have been high to the roof. The walls outside and inside would have been whitewashed or ochre coloured. The walls would have been painted with red lines, with aping design of masonry, and in those rectangles of red lines you might see painted roses. The window arches might have been painted with flowers. The whole thing would have been really colourful, and the walls would have been draped with colourful cloths. There may have been painted scenes from the Bible. It would have been full of light, really vivid, and people coming into it would just be so knocked over, and that was the point of it. When you've got such a big hall as this and it's infrequently used, it tends to be a bit of a burden on the purse. And what was happening was that as we approached the time of Henry VIII and Edward VI, the bishops here became poorer, and they spent more time away from Wells than they did here. They visited only infrequently, so the use of this hall was being reduced. There was a time when in Edward VI's reign when they were looking to take money from the church. They'd taken money from the abbeys and the monasteries, and the church was sort of thinking, what could they give away to sort of hold them back? So Bishop Barlow at that time, in 1552, he petitioned the king to say, can we take it down? The king agreed, and he gave the job to one of his courtiers, who eventually took down the roof. So we remained for some hundreds of years with 4 walls, no roof. Big porch at the front was taken down in the 18th century. And Bishop Law came in the 1820s and thought, well, this is a ruin, isn't it? But it's not as picturesque as it could be, and I've got a picturesque garden design in my head, so let's make it more of a picturesque and romantic ruin, and we'll take down 2 of the 4 walls and keep a wall which encloses the palace courtyard. We should think about the solar, or the private quarters, which is the opposite end of the hall from where the dais or raised platform where the bishop and his major guests would be. The solar was really the most highly decorated and expensive part of the hall. This is where the most important guests would be put up. They would have a magnificent fireplace. They would have their sleeping area there. They would entertain and they would discuss private matters. It was the most secure part of the hall. And they had a really high quality garderobe or toilet, which still exists. The other thing that's interesting about the place is that from the solar, there's a parapet walkway. So the bishop or his guests could go along the top of this parapet above the windows and then down a staircase into the chapel and the rest of the palace.